we're heading to the Pacific Bonsai Museum to do a video shoot. Now this isn't shot as a vlog, but I did want to give like a little context on why I'm even at this event. So the Pacific Bonsai Museum reached out to me to do some video work for them. Obviously I said yes, because why wouldn't I? Aarin Packard is going to be doing a repot event for a lot of the members of the museum. For those of you who don't know, Aarin Packard is the current curator of the Bonsai Museum, and he's been there for I think 8 years. I think he started in 2014 when Dave DeGroot, who was the original curator of the museum, retired. Yeah, let's get some coffee in our system, get our gear ready, and let's go to the museum.
Sometimes you can just pop them out if it's a shallow enough pot, but we didn't want to, so we're going to use our sickles to kind of cut around the edge a little bit and loosen it up. You only really need to do 3/4 of it, so if you want to do the whole pot you can, but at minimum you need 3 of the 4 sides to get it out. The tree was last repotted in 2018.
At the last association meeting, he said don't repot. I mean, obviously there's a difference. So why are you repotting this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the question was, why do we repot? So the 3 reasons that I repot would be that there's a loss of water, the ability for water to move through the root system. So you've lost percolation. You're going to change the container, or you're going to change the angle, plane angle of the tree to front, redesign it somehow. So this tree is being repotted more for the loss of percolation, and also wanting to get a soil sample of the tree to have it tested for nutritional levels, because there are some areas that are dying back, which I've been wanting to try to figure out why that is, and so one way of knowing that is to find what the nutrition is in the soil. So taking that soil sample will be helpful. It was previously planted in the ground for a number of years to help revitalize it, because it had was continuing to lose some branches. And so the method of putting the bonsai back into the ground and growing it for 2, 3, 4, 5 years is not unheard of. And so it's been this is the second repotting since it's come out of the ground. So the first one, the root ball, because it had been in the ground for so long, the root ball was about 3 feet by 3 feet when we got it out. So we had to take so much roots off to get it into the pot that I wasn't able to remove any of the soil from underneath the trunk that we call the core of the tree. So now this is the opportunity that to come in and actually see what's going on underneath the core of the tree itself. And so this is a very popular species for bonsai in Japan, which is where this tree came from. It was imported back in the 90s when Dave was the curator here by his teacher in Japan, Mr. Mitsuya. And so it's the only Stewartia we have in the collection. One of the sort of attractive qualities of this tree, it's referred to as a summer camellia, it's kind of its common name. So it blooms in the summertime, a really nice white blossom that looks more like a camellia flower. Like we, exfoliate our own skin with a loofah. We'll take a soft bristle brush and actually kind of like help it exfoliate it for it, and it helps to sort of bring these different tones of red and red-orange, and even the sort of lighter grayish color that's underneath as the tree starts to swell.
Considering the value of the tree and the importance of the roots,
Yeah.
do you consider repotting it in pure akadama?
Mark was asking if we wanted to put it in 100% akadama, which is in that middle cup there. It's that brown clay-like component. And that's one, so when we put that in there, it's going to increase the amount of moisture retention in the plant, but it's also going to increase the amount of nutritional holding capacity. And so for me, seeing that these roots are coming out of this kind of heavier, darker soil, which is already retaining more moisture, my goal is to try to get a little bit more oxygen and gas exchange occurring in the root system. And so I'm gonna actually put this closer to a what we call our standard mixture, which is an even part of each of those, what we call a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. And the reason to do that is I want to actually get more oxygen, which is what this soil is.
I think you're right, but in Japan they would increase the size of the particle of akadama. And it does, pumice gives no nutrients, and it's what's getting you in trouble here is so little soil and it's all pumice.
Yeah, so it is much like Mark was saying, if this tree was not exhibiting any health issues, putting it into raising the amount of akadama in it is not unheard of because it provides more nutrition. And I think I could see that transitioning to that sort of down the road. But for right now, I want to get that oxygen levels up, especially in this ring. And we do supplement nutrition. We fertilize the trees, so anything like that we can sort of adjust ourselves rather than relying on the soil itself to provide that. But the pumice provides that water. The lava provides more of an oxygen spaces for the roots to exist, and then the akadama is that really important particle that helps to bind any nutrition in the soil system itself. You can just hold it like that. Yep. So yeah, kind of working. Kind of see that donut kind of ring there. It's also how many hands you have helping, so I'm grateful for Courtney's assistance. Repotting process as well, there's a level of kind of discipline that you have to have, because it might be tempting to kind of move all over and do, oh, let's do here, but you kind of need to kind of pick your target and then just sort of stay working in that zone until you've really gotten everything done. So there's just kind of that, there's a little bit of that mentality, there we go, a little bit of that mentality of having to stay focused, even though it's something that we do a lot. Every one is a different kind of challenge, which is another reason why it's so much fun. Repotting is no tree is ever the same, and so you're going to encounter different challenges, different root balls. It's also something to it also is a really intimate. I'm taking a little break. You can keep going. It's also there's an intimacy to it, because not many people get to see this side of the tree, so to speak. Well, and the reality is, because this outer rim of soil here, this ring, is quality soil, so we have a high concentration of these fine feeder roots that's allowing us to come in and do this removal work, right? That's why we're going to be very limited in how much we actually work on this outer ring, because this is what the tree is going to rely on to recover from this operation. Dave, what was, because when I started, you had put this in the ground. When I got here, this was in the growing bed. So can you talk about your what you were dealing with when you did that?
I was just talking to someone else out here. Stewartia Monadelpha seems to be a difficult species here for some reason. And so this came from my teacher, Mr. Mitsuya, in Japan, in Toyohashi. And in Japan, which is their native land, they grow wonderfully. Here, now you fill me in on this, but I was just talking to someone earlier, and I said I've never spoken to anyone who has had a Stewartia Monadelpha that has not lost branches. It's never happened. Since it got here, it's in a pot. It's not as happy as it should be. I'm going to put it in the ground. Okay? Because everything does better in the ground. You know, everything stabilizes when you put it in the ground. The only problem within the ground is you can get your branches out of proportion because they're growing too fast. So, I mean, it's like, it's good and it's not so good, right?
It's in the ground for at least 4 years.
It's looking good.
And the root ball, I mean, was as wide as this table square. I mean, it was, you know, it took 3 of us to lift it up and get it on a cart, and then just to work it in to get it into a pot. We had cut off so much root that we couldn't get to this this zone here, and so it was looking great last fall. Had, you know, starting to develop secondary ramification, and everywhere where it was strong, the most vigorous parts of the tree died back on the fall.
That's Stewartia?
Yeah. Destroyed. The other thing though that's interesting with birds, if you do start to see a lot of bird kind of engaging with your trees and kind of tearing things up, they also could be looking for larvae in the soil. So if you know, start to see that, that might also be an indicator that you have cranefly larvae or grubs or some sort of food source that they're actually attracted to. So Courtney was prepping our pot, so we have our tie-ins, our drainage hole covers with our clips in to keep them from moving around, and then we have our tie-in wires that he's already gotten ready. Just really quickly, we talked about pots. Just like the tree, right? There's a front to the tree, there's a back. You know, we want to pick a front side of the pot and a back side of the pot. This is kind of a little bit easier to do with a monochromatic unglazed container. There's no visible damage on either side, so we can really pick either one for it. It's just looking at maybe like there's some more hard water deposit on one side, or maybe the kiln gave a little bit more of an interesting coloration to one side or the other. So then you start to look at more, you know, subtler subjective features that you might like the glazed on one side, the pattern that creates on the other. You know, this one has a little bit more of the grog, the sort of minerals, the stone that's added to the clay, and that kind of gives a little bit of texture, a little bit of variation on this side that I kind of like. You might not. You might want it to be more monochromatic, you know, kind of consistent, and that's totally fine too. But so I'm going to opt for that as the front, just given there's a little, if you look closely, there's a little bit of variation just within the clay body itself. That adds a little interest in my opinion. All right, so we're getting close. We're getting ready to put it into the pot. Is this the drainage? The aeration layer? Cool. Awesome. But we also will sift it just before we put it into the container, just to get the dust out of it, because these components can be really dusty. You can just see how much dust is coming off of it, even after sifting it several times. I'm going to put one layer down of what we call our aeration layer, or what people might also refer to as a drainage layer. It's essentially this larger particle size than the main sort of structure of the soil that we're going to use. It's the same thing with the bonsai pot. So this top is our door, and all these little holes on the bottom are windows. And so by having a larger particle sort of down here, it's going to allow for a little bit more gas exchange to transfer up and through the root ball right there. So if we remember now, we've got that ring, right? We have this ring all underneath the edge, and so we have to kind of visualize where that's going to be, and we're going to want to add more soil kind of in that same sort of donut ring shape. So when we set it down, there's going to be less air gap between the root ball and the soil, because we can't have any air. So we want a little bit of oxygen, but if the roots don't make contact with the soil, they'll just die. They won't actually go into that soil. And so we want to make sure that there's really no air gaps between our root ball and the new soil that we're actually using. So let's go here. So we're gonna obviously start with one, not obviously, we're gonna start with a pile kind of in the middle because it's really hard for us to get, you know, and work soil under the core of our tree. So we're gonna put a little bit of a mound here that when we sit it down and kind of seed it, it spreads out and ensures we have good contact with the bottom of it. And then now I'm actually gonna go around and start kind of building up this ring of soil where I remember taking it off. So if you created these holes, you've got to find a way to fill them up, and this is the first step of that, is just building up this kind of circular mound that allows us to get in there, and then we'll come in from the top with those holes that we've made to really fill it in with additional soil. I'll do one little layer just to integrate it into our aeration layer. We want to make sure that those two types of particles sort of integrate well, as we talked about. And you don't want to add a lot, because that's the other thing that a lot of people kind of like struggle with, is at least putting too much in the bottom, which raises the tree up and causes it to kind of sit too high in the pot. Go up there or right there or wherever. All right, so we're gonna just seat the tree first, and right back in. Okay, good. Tuck those. We push that front root in just so it doesn't get caught. There we go. Okay. Now that it's in, we're going to kind of seed it a little bit. We don't want to grind it too much because we know kind of how weak the roots are, the connections here. So we're just going to do a little bit of a kind of a shimmy one side, a shimmy other, and then kind of just seed it down there. And we want to make sure we've got it lined up to where our front is. So what I'm trying to do now is, I want to see this back branch a little bit here to give us some more depth. Where it currently sits at the front, we lose this branch emerging from the tree. So if we kind of kick it out a little bit more, we start to see this branch with our eye kind of engaging and giving a little bit more visual interest. We're also looking for the root system, the nabari here, to have this spread. We want to see these back roots as well, and sort of this is your chance to play with that, because when we're done, we're gonna lock this tree down and we're not gonna mess with it for another 4 years. And the worst thing to do is not take your time, and it's not right, and then you have to look at it for, you know, half a decade and just be like, man, I wish I had just taken a little bit more time to get it where I wanted it. So we also need this kind of off to one side too, because basically by moving it here, the whole thing, right, if that was more the front, all of us just look there because our eyes are naturally drawn to shapes, and so that circle we would just sort of like hone in on like a laser beam. So having it kind of offside minimizes the impact of that wound there. All right, that makes sense to everybody? Kind of how we got to where our front is. We're looking at the whole tree, considering the various features of it, how they all work together, and then finding that kind of ideal view that kind of utilizes them all in a way that doesn't detract from another portion. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to tie the tree in. We're going to put some chopsticks in to help our wires tie into. Let's see here. So we use steel for our tie-ins just because it's really strong. It's more or less inert. It doesn't react with the soil or the plant. But it's so strong that if we crank this down on the roots, it can just kind of shear them off like we talked about with a metal tool. It doesn't really care what's in its way. It'll just tear it out. So what we'll do, I'm going to try to feed it up through one of our holes. Let's see. I'm going to lift this up quickly, and if you can take this, let's take these two up through there. Yeah, I'm going to tip this a little bit so Courtney can actually fish but we're going to actually fish it up through one of these holes, which is going to provide more of a direct force down on the root ball rather than trying to go over the top of it. We'll just go up through it. We have so many options for that now. Just maybe, we can maybe put the chopstick in that hole or next to it. I say next to it so we don't block our hole to fill it. So yeah, that one we can maybe do more of like in that way, kind of go that way like on it. So we're just going to take our chopsticks that we are using. These are our tie-ins. We're going to insert these into the root ball, and then instead of actually tying onto the roots, we're going to tie onto the chopstick, and so any of the pressure is going to go onto the chopstick, not the root system. So we do it at a really shallow angle. We don't want it, you know, sticking up super long. And this will stay in the tree until we repot it next time, and then we'll simply replace it with a fresh chopstick. You know, when we redo this whole procedure will happen again in 4 years or so. And so before we do that final tie-in, you just want to double check your front, because it can shift as you're sort of hammering it and positioning it, because this is our final kind of like assessment. See, that's what happens to them. You don't want to stand in front of a chopstick. And so when you're tightening these down too, you want to be careful, because if you tighten one down too much, it can start to pull the tree kind of up to one side. So you want to at least lock it down enough to where it's not going anywhere. His got wire cutters there. We're gonna cut this. I'm gonna cut mine back a little bit. A little excess here.
Still not quite tight though.
And then the last thing we're gonna be doing is working the new soil in and around the root ball that we've